Well, our guest on this portion is not Indiana Jones, and he doesn't carry a whip, and he doesn't have a felt hat, but he is, and I'm gonna have to read it because I stumble around a lot, he's an anthropological archaeologist, am I correct?
Yes.
Dr. Brian Andrews, and he's been with us before, and it's been, what, a couple of years ago?
I think about 2 years, yeah.
And we've got you back to talk about the dig you talked about the first time you were here, because now it's yielding all kinds of things.
It is.
Where is, well, you don't want to say exactly, but what part of the state?
It's in Craig County, just a little bit northeast of the town of Chelsea. Not too far from Pollen Springs, which is a real small rural community in Craig County.
And it was found how?
It was found by a local arrowhead collector who, as a hobby, likes to walk the creeks in the area and find arrowheads, and he was finding a lot in this particular area, so he took me out to kind of show me around where he was collecting his artifacts and took me to the site, and when I saw it, I could tell, or I had a strong suspicion at least, that there would be buried deposits at the site, and as we started testing the site, looking at the subsurface deposits, it turns out that there were indeed lots of artifacts there.
Holy told you, it had to be exciting, the first discovery.
It is. It was very exciting, and this is a fairly rare occurrence because there was not a lot of modern disturbance in the area. A lot of archaeological sites have pits, people dig into them looking for things, animals dig into them. This particular site didn't have a lot of that sort of disturbance, so it offered a pristine look at the archaeological deposits there.
Well, you have two things that we're going to take a look at. First, we have a video that as I assume that it's the same site we talked about a couple of years back.
Shelter, yes.
And you also have some show and tell for us.
Yep.
So let's roll into the video first, and you kind of go over what we're seeing.
Okay, so these are RSU students. That's the main excavation area of the site. That's about, the bottom of the excavation is about 6 feet below the surface. That's me. We're doing some stratigraphic mapping. So one of the things we're interested in is the formation of the shelter, how the different layers of sediment got in there. And there's been some changes. The lower levels appear to have been washed in with water. The middle levels are colluvium, so they've washed in over the top, kind of tumbled in. So our excavations have focused on recovering artifacts, but also figuring out a little bit about how the site was formed, because that tells us a lot about the time periods that we're dealing with and the relationship between the artifacts we find at the bottom of the excavations versus those at the top of the excavations.
You're an assistant professor here at RSU, are you not?
Yes, that's
so
correct.
You're able to take some of the students. In fact, we have one on camera here in the studio today who's been with you to this dig.
Yeah, every spring I teach a general anthropology class, and as part of that class we do a fieldwork project. This past summer we did some surveys, so we were looking for other sites in the area, and I took the students out to the site. Over the summer I taught a fieldwork class where students earned college credit by digging in the dirt, which is a pretty good way to earn college credit. So we spent about 4 weeks, students doing all the excavations, collecting artifacts, mapping them in, cataloging them, bringing them back to the lab, and things like that.
Well, I want to pick your brain for a minute before we go to the show and tell portion of this. As you dig down through the different layers, what are you able to determine about Mother Earth and her growing patterns?
Well, quite a bit. So, the first thing we're interested in really is the human behavior that's represented there, but we can also tell quite a bit about past environments in the area, and this is an interesting place in terms of geography and ecology because we're on the border between the Great Plains and the woodlands, and through time, as temperature regimes change, as rainfall regimes change, that border between woodland and plains moves back and forth. So one of the things we look at is we collect samples for pollen analysis and for phytolith analysis, which are both plant remains that can tell us a little bit about what the past climate was like. We have an extensive series now of radiocarbon dates and other types of dates that tell us how old each of the deposits are, so we can correlate times where we have pollen that showed wetter conditions or more wooded conditions with a time period, and tell a little bit about how the climate has changed in northeastern Oklahoma over about the past 8,000 years.
Has there been much change?
Quite a bit. Between about 6,000 and 4,000 years ago, things were significantly warmer and drier in this area of the country. So we were kind of firmly in the plains at that point. The eastern woodlands started a little further east over in the Ozarks just because it was warmer and drier and trees couldn't grow here. As we moved into the period of about 3,000 to 2,000 years ago, we kind of reached modern climatic conditions and things were a lot like they were today.
I have to ask you this, and I'm not trying to be sensational about it, but given all the earthquake activity we've had in Oklahoma as of late, has that disturbed your work?
Not that I can tell. I know those types of fault lines don't, as far as I know, occur in the immediate area where we've been working, and they're usually, I think, deep enough that they're not going to impact significantly the archaeological remains. We do have other natural features. We have some natural burrows and things like that collapse, and so earthquakes can shift deposits a little bit. So it could have, potentially an impact. I don't know that the recent earthquakes have had a significant impact on the deposits at this site, though.
I understand. Well, let's take a look at what you brought with you, because this is intriguing material.
One of the really neat things about this site is we do have about a 6,000 to 8,000 year span of history represented in the deposits. And so one of the questions that I've been really interested in is how has stone tool technology changed through time? And we're starting to answer that. You can see these bigger spear points. These were stone spear points up here. Those are in the earlier deposits. So these right here are dating to around 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. They would have been part of a thrusting spear technology for hunting.
Before you go any further, would those be the type that they made using an antler, or did they use a stone and chip them?
Probably a little bit of both. In many cases, you start off with a hard stone hammer, and then as you get your piece smaller, you move to a softer antler hammer. So the final kind of shaping of these was probably done with antler. And this piece right here is actually a portion of deer antler tine. We're missing the tip of it, but the tip would have been used for what's called pressure flaking, where you push the tip against the stone and push off flakes to do the shaping. So we have evidence that they were actually making the tools on the site. As we move into the higher deposits, the more recent stuff, it's pretty obviously noticeable. They get smaller and smaller. So at some point, we get the introduction of bows and arrows. That's a pretty major technological innovation. And so one of the questions I'm interested in at the site is how does that new technological innovation impact things like hunting and group behavior and kind of anthropological questions about human organization and its relationship to technology. Little bitty guys like this, these would have been arrow tips, and often get the question, well, what were they hunting with such small things? You can easily hunt deer with small arrowheads. It's generally about velocity rather than size when it comes to taking down something like a white-tailed deer. So these could have been used for deer hunting. They were probably also used for hunting smaller game, maybe rabbit, turkey, things like that as well.
What are the two next that are up in the right-hand corner?
Let's see, up here?
Yeah.
So this is a piece of pottery, which is one of the few pieces of pottery from the site. Pottery is introduced into this area of Oklahoma around probably 2,000 years ago at the earliest. And this came from deposits that date to right around 2,000 years ago. So this, I think, is some of the earliest pottery that we have in this area of Oklahoma. It's not very common at the site. I don't find a lot of it. But it's probably made on local clays, so it's something that was probably a utilitarian, part of a pot that was used to store things or something like that.
And so they knew to do more than just let the pot dry. They actually baked them.
Yep, this is fired clay with a mussel shell temper in it.
Amazing, amazing. And on the far left, the long, slender piece.
So this is a bone awl. This is made from a piece of a deer tibia, lower leg bone of a deer, and it would have been used for probably perforation of leathers and things like that.
So you could stitch them together.
And here are some of the fragments of bone needles that would have been used for stitching. So these are bone needle fragments, and these are a couple of bone beads. So there were jewelry, jewelry manufacture and pieces of jewelry present at the site as well.
I know there's an area, and I don't want to get away from this, but there is an area up to not too far from Jay, Oklahoma, where you can find incredible deposits of shell, natural shell that Indian tribe would use, would break off, you know, and string those.
Use them for beads and decoration.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, they were in abundance here.
Yeah, there's a lot of, the site has a lot of mussel shells, some pieces which look like they were drilled and they were making beads and things like that out of the kind of thick pearlescent mussel shells that occur in the local creeks there.
You know, it's intriguing because as I have, what little I have had an opportunity to read about anthropology, the thing that comes screaming out is, don't worry about the question, the answer's already here.
In many ways, that's true.
Is that what you run into?
In some cases, yeah. You know, we, as an anthropological archaeologist, you know, I'm interested in more than just the artifacts themselves. It's the people that produce the artifacts and the behaviors and the social structure, how they live their lives on a day-to-day basis. Those are the sorts of things that I'm interested in. And luckily for us, all that is reflected in the archaeological record that people left behind. It's just so the answers are there. It's a matter of figuring out what those archaeological materials are telling us about that human behavior.
Now it's up to you to come up with the questions.
Yeah, exactly.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah.
We got about a minute and a half.
Okay.
What's next for you? Are you going to continue this dig, or has it just about played itself out?
The excavations at Goodson Shelter are finished up for now. Maybe not completely. We may return to the site eventually. In the immediate future, I have a couple of other projects going on. I'm working with a colleague up in Ohio where we're starting some excavations at a site that dates to more than 13,000 years ago. So I'll be doing that. I'm starting to try to find other sites in the northeastern Oklahoma area, and we're starting to find those. So eventually I want to begin excavations at some other sites to start to put together a broader picture of prehistoric human occupation of this area of Oklahoma.
Well, one final question. On the site that you're currently working, once you leave that, will it be protected?
Yes, it's on private land, and the landowner controls access to it, and he has given us permission to do all this work, and he has no plans of ever relinquishing the land, so it's going to stay kind of under locked gates, basically.
And so what happens then? The state's notified and everybody knows?
Everyone knows where it is, so it has the site is recorded in the state site registry, those that need the information know where it is, but ultimately the landowner has control over access to the site.
This is great stuff. Doctor, thank you so much, and keep us posted.
I will.
2 years from now, let's try this again.
I'd be happy to.
Oh, wow. What an interesting biz you're in, my man. That's all the time we have for today's Perspective. Check with us next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye. This is it.